Hey everyone, what's up? It's me, lo-fi musician and producer, Blue Sirens. And this is where I hang out on the internet and I talk about anything related to music. It can be anime, comic books, gear, whatever it is, you can find it here. And today, I want to talk to you about beat making, and specifically the difference between sequencing beats and using samples. But before we dive into that, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, what do I mean between the difference between a beat sequencer and sampling? Well, the biggest difference is that when you're using a sequence, you're making a pattern, and when you're using samples per se, you're normally triggering the samples with a beat pad like this. Now, is one of them better than the other? Well, I think it really comes down to how you like to write music and how you explore new ideas. So let's dive into some pros and cons of each one of them. So let's do the first one that I use a lot, which is actually using a sequencer. So in most DAWs, your sequencer is going to look something like this. Now this is normally going to be about 4 bars, but you can extend it into several bars, and you're going to see that the sequencer is going to go as you hit play over every single beat that you can plug different sounds into. You can do, of course, a snare, you can use a kick, anything that you can throw into it, sound wise, an audio file, it's going to show up in this sequencer. You can say you want to use it on quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, and 32nd notes. And there's lots of different features that you can throw into a sequencer, like nudging things backwards and forwards, being able to have it repeat certain notes. And in some DAWs, you can even do a feature called chance, where it may or may not play that sound depending on the chance percentage that you set for it. You can also have certain parts of your sequencer play forward and other parts play backward. So you have a lot of control over how the beat and how some of these sounds are going to be played through the sequencer. And you can save patterns and recall them later, and you can change all these instruments that you see in the sequencer. You can change these audio files into be different things. So if you want to use a different snare or a different kick or just a completely different sound in general, you can replace those sounds inside the sequencer without having to worry about redoing the entire beat. It will just change the sound and assume that sound that you're adding through that audio file. So it's pretty cool. I think there's a lot of ways you can control the beat in it, but there are a couple of downsides to it, because as you are making a beat with a sequencer, you may realize that other aspects of the beat aren't as flavorful or as strong as you'd like. You might focus just on the kick for a bit and kind of tune out the hi-hats or the snare because you're just focusing on the kick and trying to make sure it sounds exactly how you want that kick to sound, as opposed to maybe seeing the entire beat as a whole. You're also going to be using the sequencer mostly just to do the same loop over and over, which isn't a bad thing. I use a sequencer because I like having the same beat that I can copy and paste into multiple sections of the song and add or change different elements depending on if we're in the bridge or a chorus or an intro. I know that the kick and the snare are going to be relatively the same velocity or volume throughout the entire song without me having to go back and make a ton of different changes. So I think for consistency, the sequencer does a pretty good job, but you can lose yourself in just focusing too much on one instrument and not realizing that you're underselling other aspects of the beat. And sometimes it does make it a little bit difficult to edit, because as you change different values in one pattern section or one section of the sequencer and you move to a different one, maybe you didn't copy and paste all those right sections, all those right values, and now something may seem off when you don't want it to be off. So you have to be really on top of what's going to be the consistent sound for the drums inside the sequencer as you're using it. So there's a lot of things to keep track of, and you may over or under focus on certain elements of the beat. So there's a lot of things you can do with a sequencer, but those are the main things that I think are pros and cons for it. Now, if you don't like using the sequencer and you really want to feel the beat as it's being played, that's where sample triggering comes in. Like I said before, most people use a beat pad like this. This is made by Novation. It uses, you don't have to use all those pads that are on it, but you can if you want to. It's a lot of sounds. So triggering samples, you've already made the choice of what samples you want to use. probably before you're going to hit record. But this is where you're going to use those drum pads to play the drum beat to wherever you're kind of hearing. This is where you're going to use those drum pads to play whatever beat you're hearing in your head. And for me, I think I can hear the beat relatively well, but I can't necessarily always make my fingers play that beat. Sometimes I can. Sometimes I go back and forth between, should I use the sequencer for this or should I play the beat? And if I can't make the sequencer play the beat that I'm really feeling, I'll pull this up and I'll use a beat pad to play maybe just the hi-hat or the kick, and then I'll try and copy those values over to the sequencer and have that take over. But I think what people might get caught up on is you have to play the beat every single time. Well, like I just said, you don't have to, because you can copy and paste those values in the sequencer. But if you're playing the beat through the drum pad, most oftentimes the samples that you're using for those sounds are being translated into some sort of MIDI. And so the MIDI can stay the same and you can just switch up the audio file just like you do for the sequencer. Now, this depends on what software you're using, of course, but the majority of softwares allow you to do this. And if it's MIDI, you can still nudge and move things around, but I think the sequencer still has a lot more control and a lot more creative aspects to it, but it does kind of sometimes feel like it's a static beat, or that you're taking the drums only like 4 bars at a time, as opposed to thinking as the drum beat in the song as a whole. But over time, I think as you use a sequencer, you can think of the song as a whole. So where does the beat pad really shine for most people? Well, like I said, if there's a beat that you don't think the sequencer is really landing, but you feel like you can maybe play it, that's where the beat pad really comes in. But it also comes in really handy when you're trying to do drum fills, because drum fills on a sequencer are really tough, and you have to really get those patterns just right and get the timing to be exact. But on a drum pad, if you can tap it out, then you're pretty solid, and you just got to change the instruments, maybe move some stuff here or there, but you're going to get pretty close to what you want, hopefully on the first couple takes, especially if it's something that you can hear. The hardest part of that, though, is setting up the pads to play the samples that you want to be in a drum fill. So if you have a drum kit that you like, that you've maybe got set up with a sequencer, throw it into the beat pad format in your DAW, and you might be able to get pretty close. But it's a give and take. Sometimes you might spend 5 minutes and you've got it. Sometimes it's 30 minutes, because sometimes there's a sound in the fill that you want to use, but it's not in the drum kit that you've assembled. So try and find all the samples that you want to hear before you start to do the fills, because you're going to make it sound kind of off, and there's always going to feel like something's missing. And until you can get that sound exactly right, it's going to be tough to make sure that the rhythm is exactly right, because there's always going to be something that you're hearing in your ear, but it's just not coming out properly. But what do you guys think? Do you think it's easier to make beats using a drum pad or with a sequencer? And no matter which one you're using, we're probably using samples for both these. So why don't you go ahead and drop your favorite samples or your favorite places to get samples in the comments below, and let me know. Do you prefer to use the beat sequencer or a beat pad when it comes to making beats? Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and peace.